Some 50 years ago, Kathryn Childers made history as one of the first female special agents selected to carry the badge of the United States Secret Service, one of 5 young women who shot holes in the glass ceiling of federal law enforcement, the first women in the history of the Secret Service to do so. Her job was to keep some of the world's most important people alive. She took an oath to protect and serve the President of the United States at all cost. Her office, the White House, the Greek island of Skorpios, Hyannisport, and the bad streets in New York, Washington, and Los Angeles, where she worked undercover investigations. She also investigated threats against the president. Her life reads like a script for an action movie, one that would scare most women to death. The story she will share with you today is real. Making history was a personal best for Kathryn. Opening doors in an arena of first opportunities for women is her legacy. As a little girl, her father taught her how to face fear with a dead-eye aim, and she's been doing it ever since. Today, she will share his simple advice that changed her life and might change yours. Please welcome Kathryn Childers.
I would say, and I say this to a lot of young people, that strange things direct your life. In this case, this can changed my life. Wouldn't have thought it. Maybe not the original can. A lot of people ask me, is that the real can? Not really. As a little girl growing up in the heart of Pleasant Grove, Utah, a little tiny town in the heart of the mountain world in Utah, I wanted to grow up and be Annie Oakley. There was no question that she was my mentor. She was a sure shot. She had a horse. She had a dog. She had a cowboy hat and the coat with all the fringe. I had all those things, but I couldn't shoot the old .22. I remember the day I was about 8 years old and Daddy was down fixing a fence, and I said, "Daddy, I want to learn to shoot the .22. And he said, "Okay." He said, "You sure you're old enough?" And I said, "Yes, I think I am old enough." And he said, "Okay." And he wandered up to the house, as good daddies do, and picked up this old can out of the trash, had paper on it at that point, and he took off the paper and said, "Now, you sure you want to shoot this can off the post?" I said, "Yes, sir, I do." And he walked out at least 100 yards. Maybe it wasn't that far, but on the other side of the room, and he put that can on the post, and he handed me that old .22, and it smelled bad. You know how when they've been sitting in the closet from last year's hunt, and kind of smelled smoky like gunpowder? And it was a lot heavier than I thought it would be. He showed me how to snug it into my shoulder, and he said, "Now look down at the end of right down there at the end of the barrel, and there's a little bead." And at that point, tears started running down my cheeks. And he said, "What's wrong?" And I didn't say anything, but he took the gun out of my hand and out of my shoulder, and he said, "You know what? Maybe you're too little. Maybe you're just a girl." Wouldn't say that these days. And I said, "No, Daddy, I'm just scared." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, Kathryn, just do it scared." He said, "Your entire life you're going to be really facing challenges one way or the other that you have to give up that thing called scared." And I think incredibly women particularly are born with kind of a DNA thing that they've got this scared gene. And if you're not scared of doing something, you're young and lovely and pretty like little Nell in the melodramas. You know, I'm too scared to do that. I would never try that. But I really remember that day deciding that I would give up being scared. And I was going to do it, and I put that gun on my shoulder, and I looked down at the bead, and bang! I hit it right off the post. You can see the holes right there. And it changed my life. Because with that single event, I learned I could do something that I was scared of, and took the chance to try it. And secondly, I could do something that most girls would never try. Well, we moved from Colorado to, from this little town in Pleasant Grove to Pueblo, Colorado in I was born in 47. But I went to high school there, at this old high school called Centennial High School. And particularly to girls like Abby, Kathy's daughter in the audience, you need to know there were no women's athletic programs. Being athletic was the kiss of death. My mother was sure I would never find a husband because my bowling shoes said what size my shoes were, and I beat the boys. I don't think they do that anymore either. Anyway, I went to high school, and I was a skier, I was a tennis player, wouldn't make the team, but they let me warm up the boys. But the best thing I could do was shoot target rifles competitively in the state of Colorado. And this old coach, her name was Teach, she said, "You know, Catherine," she said, "you've got gumption." And I said, "Ma'am, what's gumption?" And she said, "I don't know, I just kind of get the feeling that you could be really good at this, that you could really achieve something with this particular athletic skill you have." She said, "And you think out of the box." In fact, one match, it was for a state championship, I was shooting against the boys. This was one of the few places where you could shoot against the boys. And they were standing there with their big feet, shooting down the range with their boots on, and I was standing there. The feet were not as big as my mother had thought, and I was not as awkward with the platform. And I said to Teach, I said, "Teach, is there anything about wearing ski boots when you shoot?" She said, "No, I don't think so." I ran out to the bus, pulled in my ski boots, put them on, and clomped back out at the range, and then I had an even playing field. And I beat the boys. And I ended up being one of the top shots in Colorado. Graduated from high school, and I went to the University of Colorado with one mission, as assigned by my mother and my father, was to get an MRS degree. Do you know what an MRS degree is? Now the young women go, "Oh, Masters of Related Science. Lean in. Me too." And I go, "No, not for me. I didn't find one." I didn't find a husband in college, and that was a great disaster as far as my family was concerned, but I had a degree in elementary education. How many of the women here now either majored in education or nursing? No law school, any thought. No graduate school programs or continuing education unless you were going to help your husband get a law degree or a medical degree and put him through college. I did get the elementary education degree, and it actually came in handy later, but I wanted to do something more. I loved what John McCain said before he died. He said, "I wanted to be a part of something important." And in 1968, 69, and 70, we were almost in as much turmoil as we are now. The country was in horrible shape. Anger about the war in Vietnam, anger about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and then Martin Luther King. And as a young woman, I was looking for any opportunity to serve my country, and there were none that I could find. But I called a dean of women that I had become friends with at the University of Colorado. I was president of the Panhellenic Society, and the sorority system had done a great deal for me. They'd given me some leadership skills, and I'd worked with the university. And I said, "Dean Parrish, could you get me a job in Washington?" And she said, "Yeah, I suppose I could." And she picked up the phone, and she dialed, and she said, "Don." Well, the rest of us knew him as Congressman Donald G. Brotzman. She said, "Don, I've got a girl in my office here who I think would be a great staffer for you." And he said, "Well, Polly, can she type?" "Can you type?" I said, "Yes, I can type, but I do other things." In those days, typing was really the kiss of death. You didn't want to admit you could type. Well, I got the job. He hired me to be a military caseworker. And it was fun, it was interesting. I went all by myself in my '59 Volkswagen with no seat belts, found a roommate, and I was working as a military caseworker. And one day, one of my colleagues and friends said, over lunch, I think it was tuna, because we were eating sandwich. She said, "You won't believe this, but they're hiring female bodyguards for Tricia Nixon." "Really?" I said, "What do they do?" She said, "Well, you'd probably work at the White House, and you'd probably travel on Air Force One. You'd go around the world with her. You'd be part of the group." She said, "I've heard that after John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy were assassinated, they were expanding the Secret Service." And she said, "Oh, but you've got to carry a gun. And you've got to be very brave. You have to be willing to die to save the person you're protecting." And I thought, I don't have any children. I don't have a future. I said, I could do that. And she said, "Oh, you could not," spewing tuna across the table as girls do. And she said, "I'd be scared to do that." I said I wouldn't be scared. I found out how to apply for the job, and interestingly, my first interview was with a man named not Neil Armstrong, but a man named Clint Hill. Clint Hill was the agent, as you recall, that saved Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis from falling off the back of the limousine the day after the Fort Worth stop in Dallas in 1963. As a young woman in high school, I had watched that and wondered, who is that man? And why is he doing that? And how is this happening? And here I was, after getting an interview with him, talking to him about what he would expect to me as if I were selected one of the women in the United States Secret Service whose mission was to protect and serve, protect our leaders, protect foreign dignitaries, protect children of a slain president like John and Caroline Kennedy, and participate in investigative and undercover work ferreting out the crimes against our currency. Most people don't really realize it, but the Secret Service is part of the Treasury Department. It was founded years ago to try to figure out which currency was which after the Civil War. And they were real cops. They were real detectives. And it was decided in making a protective arm for our leaders, for our president, that it would be better to have someone who had the full experience, that wasn't just a policeman standing there watching post, that they also knew how to protect, to serve, and to investigate. And in one case, after my training, I could kill a man with my thumbs. So the training was extensive, but first I had to get the job. So I had to get a top secret security clearance. I had to go through many exams and physical determinations as to whether or not I could do the physical things, and I did pass. He did say one thing to me in that interview. He said, you realize that with this commitment, if we hire you as one of the first 5 women in the Secret Service, you have to be prepared to give your life for the person you are protecting. And I agreed that that's exactly what I would do. After that first year of extensive training, it included shooting riot guns, shotguns, Uzi submachine guns, a sidearm of a .357 Magnum. I learned how to take people down and do all of the so-called copy kinds of things that you would believe. The other 4 women who had been selected had all come from the municipal police department in Washington, D.C. I was the only civilian. And I had to laugh because no one believed what we were doing. The only policewoman in history was on ABC in black and white. Her name was Angie Dickinson, and she was known as the policewoman, unless you saw a crossing guard with a hat and a paddle in Fort Worth crossing the boulevard. No one thought of women doing anything like this. So the training was quite remarkable, and they did swear 5 of us in, first 5 they call us, in the Treasury Department. And I will say this, it was open to the press, and I picked my outfit very carefully. Because if you were going to break through the glass ceiling, I wanted to look good. The other girls made fun of me of it, but the girl with the shortest dress and the black high shoes got more attention than my suede boots and my suede coat. This is what they wrote in the Washington Post. Dateline, Washington. 5 young women took the oath of office today as special agents of the U.S. Secret Service and became the first of their sex to join the 106-year-old history as special agents. Customarily, they'd be referred to as pretty. This is a quote. Pretty. That's the first. They didn't say I could kill a man with my thumbs, or that I was the best shot coming out of Colorado, and I won accolades when I was in high school. Pretty. Or at least attractive, since this is true of most young women successful in their careers. They entered the room with their faces averted because they were to work undercover later and were sworn with their backs to the camera. There was, now it even gets more detailed. Now we get to the heavy stuff. 1 brunette, 1 golden blonde, and the 5th had short frosted dark hair. All had lithe figures. Well, I didn't even know what lithe meant. So I went home and looked it up, and when they said I was skinny, which I've never been skinny in my whole life, I took it. I said, that's okay, I'll do that. We were all single, all college graduates, and according to Assistant Secretary Eugene Rosides of the Treasury Department, we would continue with the same responsibilities as the men. And that would be to protect the president, the vice president, foreign heads of state, the widow of former president until the death of his remarriage, major presidential and vice presidential candidates, and, as I said, foreign heads of state. They issued a gun, .357 Magnum, a badge, a commission book that stated I was on a mission for the President of the United States, my uniform, it worked, and an American Express card. In 1971, girls didn't get credit. You never got a letter in mail that said they would drop your interest rate from 13% down to 7% or whatever. You never got asked to that dance. You either had to have your father, your brother, any male that you could find on the corner sign on your application to get a credit card. Well, because I was in the Secret Service, they got my American Express card. And it is still dated 1971, and I still carry it today. I really think that of all the things, the gun, the badge, the commission books, the handcuffs, all that accoutrement, the American Express was really special. Training was extensive, involved a great deal to do with cars. I learned to drive the presidential limousine with 2 feet on the brake pedal and the gas so that you could travel at least 18 inches or closer behind the bumper of another car so that no one would come in between you to make an attack. At one point, they had us all dress up in shorts and tennis shoes and get a nice big swig of water and try to recreate what Clint Hill had done in Dallas, where he, after the shots were fired, leapt off the follow-up car as it was accelerating and pulled himself up with handholds on the back of the limousine to contain Mrs. Onassis, Mrs. Kennedy, who, as we've all heard the story, was horrified with the things that were on the trunk and was trying to collect really parts of the president's body and pull him back in the car. Clint Hill was a relatively young agent. He had been protecting Mrs. Kennedy for some time. If you've read his book called Mrs. Kennedy and Me, or 5 Presidents, it's a touching story. He literally leapt into the back of that car as it accelerated up to 40, 50 miles an hour, covered her body with his body, which is the ultimate thing Secret Service agents do to protect. And there's some kind of connection with that with caregiving. He was willing to do anything to try to protect her. And he did save her life and suffered many years, he even will say, with post-traumatic stress from that event. They also told us about a night stop. A night stop is the most dangerous thing in the investigative portion or in the police world that any of these police folks do. Because you're coming behind another car in the dark of night, you don't know who's there. This was a training mission. And there were 2 of us in a car, and there were what looked like 4 agent instructors in the front car, and they were driving around the training area at 140, I swear, hundreds of miles an hour. And we were behind them, following them, and our mission was to pull up to the side, put our badge out the window, and scream, "Secret Service, federal agent, pull over, you're under arrest, pull over." Well, they didn't react. My partner was driving. They slowed down. Remarkably, they slowed down, but then they sped up again. And we were looking and trying to see what was going on, and all of a sudden, they stopped again. They got out of the car like they were supposed to, put their hands up in the shadow of the dust and the grime and the grit that had been flowing around in the lights of the car. And I said to him, "Did you count them? How many? How many were there?" And he said, 4. Did you count them? And I said, I couldn't see. Was there 4 or 5? And this is the conversation going back and forth as it's deathly silent. We're both behind the wall of the protective cover of the door of the car, have our weapons trained on the car, screaming at them, "Throw your guns down, put your hands in the air." When all of a sudden, I felt the cold steel of a revolver behind my right ear. And the voice saying, "Bang. You're dead." What had happened was they dropped one of the guys. When they slowed down, one of the agent's instructors had rolled out, had fallen off to the side. They went a little bit further, so they literally got the drop on us. And from that day forward, the agent instructor said what you learned from that was not only was that dangerous, not only was it hard to do, but it taught you a really important what if that we didn't teach you about shooting and working up and doing all the things that you do with advances and all those things in protection and in police work. It taught you that if it doesn't look right, it's probably not. You've got to trust your gut. You've got to look around your surroundings and your entire situation to see if you think it's right. And then there's no real handbook. You just play it by ear. That was a life lesson. It was also a life lesson that I was going to have a sense of humor. One of my first assignments in the, shall we say, police division was to arrest a little woman named Minnie Miller with a big partner, probably as big as you are, who I think had worked he was like a halfback for the Washington Redskins. I know we don't mention them here in this part of the world. Anyway, we were making this arrest, and he was not happy. There was some discrimination. These men were not happy about our being brought in. They said, you can be police people, you can be adjuncts, but you can't be agents. That's a man's world. That's our man's bastion. But here we were, making this arrest. He was not happy. We got to the door, and you could hear all this shuffling going on in the back, and the sound of the music Shaft, which was very popular in Southeast Washington. And it was always taught in those kind of arrests, if there was contraband or counterfeit or whatever we were getting, you go in quickly, or it goes out the back door, or into the bathroom, into the commode. You have to move quickly. We're banging on the door. Federal agent, Secret Service, open the door, open the door. And still the shuffling, the sounds. And he looked at me and he said, you're so tough, you break down the door. I was lithe, remember? And I said, you're so tough, you break down the door and I'll shoot them. I'm a lot better shot than you are. So you really did genuinely have to keep your head about you and keep a sense of humor. Another lesson learned in a caregiving world. One day I had done all this preparation, and Clint Hill called me. And he said, we would like to put you on the Kennedy Children's Protective Detail. And you will protect John and Caroline. John was 14. I'm sorry, Caroline was 14, John was 11. By the way, they never called him John. That was a press name. He was only called John. When I first met him, he said, hello, I'm John Kennedy, and told me a joke. He was a very clever little sweet young fellow. My primary really person that I protected was Caroline. But for heaven's sakes, I said, what's my job? What's the rest of the story? He said, keep them safe, keep them happy, keep them comfortable, keep them alive, and keep them from embarrassing the President of the United States or their mother, Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy. Onassis. And I said, they're 14 and 11. You can't be serious. Well, I began my new role as the pistol-packing nanny. And it was a good cover. Most people thought I was the nanny. They didn't know that I had a .357 Magnum, 6 extra rounds of handcuffs, a commission book, and a love red lipstick in my purse. Probably the most interesting trips with them were to the island of Scorpios. I spent 2 summers, and there's a thing they called sitting post or standing post, where you just stand and watch. It was not a bad assignment. It was at a small island across from Scorpios, and on a regular basis, Mrs. Onassis would invite me over to the yacht Christina to discuss what we were going to be doing in the next stop, which was at a tennis and skiing camp in Austria. And it was a fascinating observation. What I got from the Secret Service was not only incredible skills, but I felt like a mouse in the pocket of history. Here I was, standing and chatting with Mrs. O about Caroline's future plans on this huge yacht that had belonged, or did belong, to Aristotle Onassis. But it was also lonely. When I went off duty, I would go back over to this little island and had no friends. There was one agent that was with me. We would rotate back and forth to Athens. And I made friends with a little woman down the street who did not speak English. But that was okay. We would sit in the afternoon and drink coffee. If you've had Greek coffee, you know it's very strong. And every day when I would come by to say hello, she would share with me this cup of very dark Greek coffee. But she would never share with me. She would just go in her little tiny house that was yet to be completed and make the coffee and come out of a piece of cloth that covered the kitchen and give me the cup. We played a game where we would flip nickels. I got kind of clever when I was in the Secret Service and we didn't have anything to talk about or do, so we'd flip nickels. And she'd call heads or tails and we'd mark as to who won the guessing game. Later, her daughter came to Athens, I met her, and I said, "Why won't your mother have a cup of coffee with me?" And she smiled and she said, "Catherine, she's a very proud woman, and she only has one cup that she thinks is fine enough to share with you." And I've always been saddened that I didn't think to get that through my head that I could have given her as a gift another cup, so we could have shared that. We had fun times, crazy times. I protected Caroline at a tennis and skiing camp, but most often I was assigned to care with her in New York when she went to the Brearley School. And one day, you remember I'd been trained to drive the car, and I'd been trained to watch for snipers and all these bad guy things that happen in an assassination attempt. We weren't really worried that they would be assassinated. We were concerned about kidnapping. And she came out of school, she jumped in the back of the car, and she says, "I'm tutoring on First Avenue, hurry." I said, "Caroline, it's not on the schedule. I don't know where this place is." "Oh, I'll tell you, just go, go, go." So I'm driving down First Avenue, and she's saying, "Oh," as kids do in the backseat, turn left here." And I checked the traffic. I thought about all the things you do in downtown New York when you're trying to keep the most important little girl in the world safe, alive, happy, and calm. I turned left because there was no traffic coming at me. Just started to enter the other side of First Avenue, and bam, I was T-boned. And all I could think of is that there would be snipers on the roof, that there would be other cars that would come up and block us in, and I was alone with her. And I screamed at her, "Get down, get down." No, she was not my friend. We got along, and we had to have that relationship because she had to believe me. She got on the ground, I jumped out of the car, pulled out my revolver. At that point, I finally had a holster. Pulled out my gun and observed this man walking up from a strange-looking kidnapping vehicle. It was a 1963 Bondoed Caddy. It had, the fins that had been taken care of, and this little fellow had a rather large belly and suspenders and a little pork pie hat. And he looked at me, and I immediately, I don't know, so I threw him up over the top of the hood of the car. And he's kind of rolling. Because I remembered the feel of the cold steel behind my ear. I put the gun up and I said, "Secret Service, you're under arrest." He said, "What'd I do, lady? You hit me." And I'd hit him. It was a one-way street. But I gave him my card and I said, "The Secret Service can help you with this. This was my fault, and they'll fix your car. So don't get upset about it. Just call this number." Later that year, I had left the protection of John and Caroline and ran into Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis on the street, just like a normal person. The traditional walk, the quiet voice, and we recognized. And she said, "Oh, Miss Clark, what are you up to these days?" And I said, "Oh, I've been protecting presidents, people running for president, working undercover, buying counterfeit." She said, "Oh my, undercover?" And I said, "Oh yes, it's kind of like acting with the gun in your purse. It's not that hard." And I said, "As a matter of fact, next week I'm protecting the Princess of Spain." And she smiled, and she said, "Oh, Miss Clark, you live such an interesting life." I was 23, I guess, talking to one of the most important women I had ever known. And I looked at her and I said, "Thank you, ma'am. It's all relative." And it certainly was. I'm going to tell you about the Queen of Spain. She was my very favorite foreign dignitary. I was working at the White House, and they brought me to the South Grounds, and the head of that detail, Jerry Parr, said, You're going to protect the Queen for the next week, no matter where she goes, no matter what she does. You stay within 2 to 3 feet of her, whatever she wants to do, and you keep her happy and keep her from embarrassing the United States. And I said, okay, we can do that. One of the best part of that was a state dinner. And I have told this story, maybe some of you have heard it, that the worst part was that I had the pledge formal to wear to the state dinner, but the bag was a big leather shoulder bag filled with all that stuff, and I had no purse. Now, you wouldn't think that was a big deal to a Secret Service agent, but you can't go to a state dinner with a 30-pound purse on your shoulder. So I raced over to Garfinkel's on my way back to the White House, and this lady in the purse department was quite aghast to see this young woman with a wiglet attached. Remember wiglet? In a kind of a pledge formal looking gown for the 70s, with my badge saying, "I need a purse for my gun." All of a sudden, this red, white, and blue haze passed across her eyes. She was rather large, wearing black stockings, whatever. Pearls held her glasses, and her chest started going in and out and in and out. Suddenly, she was on my team, grabbed every purse she'd ever had in her department that was black, took me into the dressing room, and we sat there adjusting which purse would hold my gun, my badge, and whatever. And it worked. And I went to the state dinner, and then later was told that I was going to be continuing with her to the blast-off of the Apollo 12 moon mission. I think of all the things I did, that was the most interesting and exciting and earth-shaking. I sat with the Vice President, the Prince of Spain, the Queen of Spain, Henry Kissinger, who was Secretary of State, and Neil Armstrong. And I listened, couldn't watch because our job was to keep track of everything that went on when the blast-off went off, because that's when you really worry whether it's a kick-up, a black, some event that will cover an event like an assassination attempt or a kidnapping with what was happening. So I didn't really see it, but I felt it. If you have not seen First Man, see it. It's a wonderful movie about Neil Armstrong, the man who walked on the moon. But when that rocket took off, the earth shook. You could feel it. It sounded like an old Model T, rat-a-tat, 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 rat-a-tat. And I heard the Prince say to Neil Armstrong, "What's it like to walk on the moon?" And he was a very quiet, effusive, I guess would be a word, and he said, "I felt very small." And I thought, for a man who made history with such a remarkable thing, that was a really pretty simple answer, but was probably obviously true. Well, my mother saw me sitting next to the Queen of Spain in the galley. There were 7,500 of us up close, another 500,000 watching on the coast of Florida, and thousands across the United States. She was not particularly proud. She called my sister and she said, "She'll never get married." She is sitting amongst all these important people, and she's carrying a gun. And my sister said, "Well, you're probably right. I'll see what I can do." Well, my sister was living in Corpus Christi, and she went on the search to find me a husband. And she did. His name was Cecil Addison Childers, Jr., and what really sealed the deal was that he was a fifth-generation Texan born in Fort Worth. Actually, most of those generations were from Abilene. Our one claim to fame was that Cecil's grandfather, I think, wasn't particularly an academician, but he gave a piece of land to ACC, which was then called Childers Classical Institute in the early years before it became now ACU. Well, she introduced me to Cecil, and it was a tough decision for me. I loved what I was doing. I had a terrible case of Potomac fever. I had my eye on the ball that I could eventually become the first director of the Secret Service, let alone on the presidential detail. I was on the front line of success for women, blowing holes through the glass ceiling. But I could see that my life was going to be dismal. It was going to be lonely, wasn't going to have children, wasn't going to have any personal life whatsoever. In fact, I did have a date with a fellow, and he made fun of me because I had handcuffs in my purse. Because you carry your gun and your badge and everything with you. And so in this party, he said, "You can't use those." I said, "Oh, yes, I can," and I handcuffed him to the chair. It got worse when I realized I didn't have the key. Anyway, I married Cecil after he proposed to me on the rifle range at training. We trained all the time. And I was shooting a Uzi submachine gun. And this conning tower says, "Make your weapons safe. Put your weapons in the air." And kind of, Agent Clark has a phone call from Texas. Well, I thought maybe my mother was ill, my sister was calling, but I climbed to the top of the con and go, "Agent Clark," and it's Cecil's nurse. He was a psychiatrist, and as you all know, in the 70s, and even now, doctors do not know how to dial the phone. They always say, "Get Dr. Jones, get Mrs. Kate, call Catherine." And she said, "Dr. Childers would like to talk to you." Well, Dr. Childers and all the men are waiting, and they're really disgusted, and they really want to go forward with what we were doing. And he goes, Kate, I've got the ring. Will you marry me?" And we dated for about 1.5 or 2 years. I guess it was first love. It was exciting, heart-throbbing, overwhelming, and somewhat inconvenient. I got down to the bottom of the tower, and the fellas, as we jammed these clips in the Uzis and started, the fella said, "What was that?" And I said, "Oh, this fella that I've been dating just asked me to marry him." And he said, "What'd you say?" I said, I told him it wasn't a great time. But I married him, and I moved to Texas, and I had 3 stepsons, 1 son of my own television show, went into the publishing business, had a great life. He loved his patients. He fondly referred to his patients as his crazy people. He was boarded in gero, adult, every kind of psychiatry you would want to know, and he loved people that needed help with mental health. There was just no question about it. Said he would never retire. I certainly didn't want to retire. He said, "I'm just going to die at my desk." Well, it turns out that didn't work. In 2008, his office manager said, "Catherine, he's got to quit. He can't remember things that he needs to remember." She said, "I think he has problems with his memory, maybe dementia." So we started, I turned in my trophy wife crown for trophy caregiver, and I started the process of trying to figure, was it he was old, he had dementia, maybe he was working too hard, or did he have Alzheimer's? Well, we went through the whole route of trying to determine that, and finally the neurologist, the last one, said, "Cecil, I'm so sorry, but the indication is that you have Alzheimer's disease." And we walked out, and I said, "Does it scare you? Are you afraid of this?" And I don't know if it was cavalier, or he knew too much, or he knew too little, but he simply said, "Everybody's got to die of something." And I remembered thinking, "You're supposed to tell me what to do. You're supposed to tell me to go to the West Center and to find the specialists at the Mayo Clinic or University Hospital. You're supposed to know what to do." The reality was the disease had taken any knowledge of what he knew what to do. I had no handbook. I had no James L. West facility. I had no one to tell me what to do at all. So I turned to a little blue book that I had learned about through Al-Anon. It's called One Day at a Time. And I used that little book. I just took out alcohol and just replaced the first line of being absolutely helpless over Alzheimer's, and did the best I could for the next 8 years to figure out how to live one day at a time and let go and let God. I threw him into a Airstream trailer. We drove 30,000 miles. I drove, he watched. I even learned to back the damn thing up. And I found time and time again that many women and many families were absolutely shanghaied. They couldn't do it because women wouldn't learn to back up the truck. But we did. We came back. When we came back, his health worsened. And as we drove back and forth to Corpus Christi, to doctor's appointments and whatever, he would count trucks. All the way in, all the way back, sometimes up to 100 trucks. Not big trucks, not red Volkswagens, not convertibles, trucks. And I will say my patient waned a little bit. And finally I said, "Cecil, why are you counting trucks?" And he looked at me sadly with these piercing blue eyes, and he said, "Because I can." And it did serve a purpose. Then things really went south, and I'm going to just wrap it up here on telling you that Hurricane Harvey hit Cecil and me in our home about a year ago on August 25th in our little hamlet where we had retired in Rockport, Texas. lived under a canopy of oak trees. He loved it there. Remarkably, he liked to feed squirrels. He loved crazy people, and he always said, all my friends are nuts. It went pretty well until the storm came. And then we hit another plateau, both physically, emotionally, and mentally. The mayor told us to leave or write our social number on our forearms so that they could identify the bodies because they thought it would be so bad. We did. We came back to a total decimated home and a community. South Texas is still not recovered. And I think it will be some time until that. And then I had to make the horrible choice of putting him in a group home. I'd done it. I'd made it through being funny and clever and turning his counting trucks into games, but he had to go to a group home, and he hated it. He hated being there. And the guilt was the hardest thing I've ever had. I didn't have James L. West to help me. Cecil always said guilt was that gold stuff around mirrors, so I guess he was a psychiatrist. Maybe he knew. I'm going to wrap it up by saying we came back from Marfa, where my son had a boutique hotel after the storm. And we were driving. He was counting trucks. Then he was starting to count speed signs. I mean, I needed a break. And all of a sudden, we pulled up to this I-90 checkpoint, where there were the border checkpoint. And I have this big sticker on my truck that says former agent, United States Secret Service, with a big star. And I thought, well, this will be kind of fun. They're going to be impressed. We pulled up, and the dog even kind of saluted in the back. Cecil didn't pay much attention. The men braced, kind of, like you do when a general comes in. They'd seen the star. Their eyes and mine locked, and they went complete to the right, and they looked at Cecil, and they saluted, and they said, "Thank you, sir, for your service." So what good does making history do? Life keeps you humble. I'm delighted to have been here today. All I can say is I didn't have what you have here, nor do many people in the state have it. And what you're doing is a gift, and I thank you for doing it. I have one more funny TV story, but I think we're out of time. Can I do it? Sure. 2 minutes? One person asked, come up here. This is Glenn. I chose him because his wife's sitting right here, so if I flirt with him, she can throw her purse at me. I was on TV for 21 years, interviewed celebrities, James Michener, the goats that were in the 4-H show. You don't have to deal with that. People always ask me, who was the most famous, good-looking, wonderful celebrity man you ever interviewed? And I said it had to be Robert Wagner. So you are my Robert Wagner today. I think he probably wears a little scruff, don't you think? Nice-looking eyes. Okay, good sense of humor. And I said to him, if you had to choose, of all the characters that you played, Heart to Heart, you liked that one, right?
Right.
Stephanie Powers, I had big hairs one day. And I said, if you had to choose, who would you choose to marry your oldest daughter? And he looked at me and he said, oh, Catherine, what a good question. Kind of sexy.
Yeah.
Okay, did you hear what I said?
Oh, Catherine.
You're going to have to speak up. They can't. And with heart.
Oh, Catherine, what a good question.
One more time with gusto.
Oh, Catherine, what a good question.
I went home and took off the part about what a good question, and that's how I go to bed at night. Thank you all.